let's bring in Allan Behm from the Australia Institute. Allan, thank you for your time today. Now, are these latest attacks a sign that there is perhaps worse to come here?
Look, I think there is worse to come. Exactly what that worse is going to be, Brittany, it's hard to tell at the moment. But certainly if Lukashenko brings his Belarusian forces along with the Russian forces, that will supplement the Russian forces considerably, particularly since the Belarusian forces are at this point fresh and have not been tried in battle. So I think we've got quite a lot of unknowns in front of us at the moment. There's the continued threat of the use of nuclear weapons. This has been made half a dozen times now by Putin and by his foreign minister, Lavrov. Frankly, I don't think that nuclear weapons will be used because the consequences are completely incalculable, but it's still a threat. So this is a war which has not ended and shows little signs of ending soon.
Now let's talk about the West. Do you think the US is powerless when it comes to stopping Russia's aggression?
No, I don't. The US has enormous power, and should the US decide on some circumstances that it might use it, it could use it with great effect. I think what the United States is displaying at the moment is a very considerable measure of restraint and nuance and deliberation. There are already high-level sanctions applied to Russia, and I think that along with the sanctions applied by the West, Russia is already feeling the consequences of its invasion of Ukraine. Should, however, Russia and Belarus escalate the warfare and particularly resort to nuclear weapons, the United States at that point would have little choice, I think, but to up the ante considerably, even to the point perhaps of deploying some forces to the Ukraine itself. That would be a very dangerous step, but the US has all the power to do that.
And what do you think is the likelihood of nuclear being used as a defence mechanism?
Well, I don't think the United States would use nuclear weapons as a defence mechanism in Ukraine. I think that's very, very unlikely. More probable, I think, is realisation of the Russian threat to use them. But I think that it's a very low probability because the consequences, as I said a moment ago, are simply incalculable. Russia won't know how the United States would respond to that, and it certainly wouldn't know how either of the other two European nuclear powers would respond. I don't think that France or Britain would respond using nuclear weapons, but they would certainly see that the use of a nuclear weapon in Ukraine was effectively an attack on Europe, and it could well see NATO deploying NATO forces into the Ukraine in the direct defence of Europe itself. And these are the big worries and the big risks that are unfolding at the moment, where the best outcome would be for Putin at this stage to look to negotiation of a settlement in Ukraine, cut his losses, in other words.
And you just mentioned there as well response. Now let's talk about Western response, in particular Australia. We've heard from the Defence Minister here. He says he's considering sending troops to help Ukrainian soldiers. What do you make of this?
Look, Australia has contributed modestly to the materiel needs of the Ukraine army, particularly in terms of vehicles and some ammunition. To deploy Australian advisors, as we used to call them, or military trainers to Ukraine would be, in my opinion, a significant step up. And I don't think that Australia's interests at this point warrant an increase of that kind. If we were to see that there were training deficiencies in the Ukraine armed forces, I think a better avenue would be to work with our NATO colleagues and the United States to train the Ukrainian trainers in our countries to collaborate and assist in that, bearing in mind that there'd be very, very few people in the Australian Army who can speak Ukrainian, that the medium of training would be English. There's, at the lower levels of the Ukrainian Army, not a lot of English spoken. So I think that we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves when we think we might send military trainers to Ukraine. As I said, a better avenue would be to bring English-speaking Ukrainian trainers to Australia, train them here and then send them home. That would be a possibility, I think.
Indeed, and I mean, just less than 24 hours ago, yesterday, we saw major blasts in major cities across Ukraine, especially Kyiv. I mean, many people commuting to work, it was near playgrounds. Many people unfortunately died as well. So I guess as Russia calls on its Belarusian counterparts, is this an escalation?
Look, it is in part an escalation, but it is equally an attack on the civilian population of Ukraine. One of the things that the human race has been able to do, at least since the end of the First World War, is to work out that you can go to war, but without inflicting unnecessary damage on the civilian population or on the civilian infrastructure. I think it's a very sad commentary on Putin's understanding of warfare, that his way of retaliating against a possible Ukrainian attack on the bridge, and Ukraine has not acclaimed that yet, is to attack the civilian population of Kyiv and of the Ukraine more broadly. In my opinion, these constitute acts against humanity, and I think it's a very serious change in the direction of the use of armed force by Putin, and a change in direction for which ultimately Russia will have to be brought to account.
Thank you for your time today, Allan Behm. Always a pleasure for your insights here.
Thank you very much.